Dressmakers, tailors, hatters, and cobblers. In colonial America, most people made their own clothing. This was especially true for farmers who had everything they needed to make clothes on their farms. Because making clothes was hard work, most people had only two outfits: one set of work clothes and one set of fancier clothes to wear on Sunday. That was it. People did not get new clothes until their old clothes were worn out. Some farmers and their families had the money to buy clothing instead of making it themselves, so they would take a trip to town when they needed new clothing. There, they would find several different people who specialized in making different things: the dressmaker, the tailor, the hatter, and the cobbler. In the old days, there were no racks full of dresses for women to try on. It took a lot of time for a dressmaker to make a dress, so she wanted to make sure someone would buy every dress made. And it cost a lot of money to buy a dress, so a farmer's wife wanted to choose the exact color and style she wanted. The dressmaker might display one or two dresses in the shop window, but most dresses had to be made to order. If a woman was very wealthy, she might even order a dress from England. When a woman came in looking for a new dress, the dressmaker might show her some patterns, designed according to the latest fashions. The woman could choose the pattern and fabric she liked best. The dressmaker would then use a measuring tape to measure the woman's arms and legs, as well as her chest, neck, and waist. The measurements told the dressmaker how much cloth would be needed for the dress. The dressmaker would then cut the cloth into pieces according to the shape of the patterns. After all the pieces were cut, the dressmaker would hand stitch or sew the pieces together using a fine needle and thread. Remember, back then, there were no electric sewing machines like we have today, so this was slow, careful work. Finally, the dressmaker might add fancy finishing touches, like hand-knitted lace or embroidery around the collar or hem of the dress. It would sometimes take several weeks to make a new dress. Tailors did the same kind of work as dressmakers, but they made clothing for both men and women. People who wanted new clothes could visit a tailor and have their measurements taken. The tailor would then make a shirt or a pair of breeches to order. Breeches were the knee-length pants that men wore in colonial times, along with long, woolen stockings. Almost everyone in early America wore a hat. In fact, it was considered strange or rude to walk around bareheaded. Men wore hats with brims, and women wore soft bonnets. People wore hats to keep their heads warm and dry, to keep the sun out of their eyes, and to protect the expensive wigs they frequently wore. People who made men's hats were called hat makers or hatters. Men's hats were made out of beaver skin, wool, or camel fur and were fastened together with glue that the hatter mixed himself. As with clothing, people could not simply walk into a hat shop and walk out with a hat on the same day. Instead, a customer chose the particular style of hat, had his or her head measured by the hatter, and came back days or weeks later when the hat was done. Of all their clothing, shoes were the hardest for farmers to make themselves. So when a farmer needed a new pair of shoes, he would visit the cobbler or shoemaker. The cobbler would make shoes to order just as was done with the dressmaker, tailor, and hatter. Most people had only 1 or 2 pairs of shoes. Plenty of people had no shoes at all. Poor farmers and their families didn't wear shoes for most of the year. If a farmer did have shoes, he might wear the same pair of shoes every day for months. As a result, shoes wore out quickly. Most farmers could not afford to buy a new pair of shoes very often. So instead of buying new shoes, they would take their old shoes to the cobbler to have them patched or repaired. Cobblers spent as much time fixing old shoes as they did making new ones. The shoemaker used many specialized tools for his trade. In early America, most shoes were made out of leather, which comes from the dried hide or skin of a cow. There were 2 parts to a shoe, the sole and the upper, both made from leather. The sole was the bottom of the shoe, and the upper was the top part of the shoe. Just like a dressmaker or tailor, the shoemaker would take measurements, cut the leather, and then use a needle and thread to sew the pieces together. Making clothes, hats, and shoes was hard work. Farmers who could afford it were very happy to pay others, dressmakers, tailors, hatters, and cobblers, to do that work for them. Today, it's much easier to purchase clothes. We can choose from a variety of styles that are already sewn, rather than getting measured and waiting for weeks to get our new clothes. And we don't even have to go to 4 different tradespeople to get the clothes, hats, and shoes we wear. We can just go to one department store.